Привет, друзья! Мы решили открыть новый сезон публицистического интернет-ток-шоу «Окно, будущее» еще одним выступлением знаменитого футуролога, мыслителя, инженера и изобретателя Рэя Курцвейла. В этом выступлении, которое он не так давно сделал на конференции Creative Innovations Asia Pacific, Рэй, как обычно, очень много говорит о будущем технологий, о будущем социальной сферы, о будущем медицины, образования. Ну и, разумеется, он говорит на свою любимую тему про развитие искусственного интеллекта. Но это, наверное, даже не самое интересное. Самое интересное в этом выступлении то, что он раскрывает сами инструменты, которыми он пользуется, когда он делает свои знаменитые прогнозы, которые так часто оказываются верными. Он показывает то, как он измеряет прошлое человечества и его настоящее для того, чтобы заглянуть в будущее. Интересно, что он заглядывает также и в прошлое искусственного интеллекта с тем, чтобы показать, почему искусственный интеллект достиг такой степени развития сейчас и какой степени развития он может достичь через 10 или 20 лет. Еще одна интересная тема – это его новая книга, на этот раз не научная, не инженерная, не футурологическая, а художественная книга для юношества, которая называется «Даниэль. Хроники супергероини». Подробнее он об этом расскажет сам. Я хочу сказать, что перевод этого выступления я никому не доверил, я сделал его сам, поэтому все ваши претензии к качеству перевода вы можете направлять непосредственно мне, но в процессе перевода я пользовался техническим инструментарием, разработанным компанией Logos Global, которая выпускает эту программу. Ну что ж, приятного просмотра выступления Рэя Курцвейла.
So we're so deeply grateful that Ray is doing this for us. We first met Ray in 2013 when he attended Creative Innovation 2013, and he blew all our minds then. Over the years, we've stayed in touch, and I've been very fortunate to spend a lot of time with him and also attend the executive program at Singularity University, which I highly recommend. He's an incredibly special person. I think you all know his mind is extraordinary. He's created this talk today for us. It's brand new. No one in the world has seen it before. So I'm just going to read you his introduction. Ray Kurzweil is one of the world's leading inventors, thinkers and futurists with a 30-year track record of accurate predictions. Called the restless genius by the Wall Street Journal and the ultimate thinking machine by Forbes magazine, he was selected as one of the top entrepreneurs by Inc. magazine, which described him as the rightful heir to Thomas Edison. PBS selected him as one of the 16 revolutionaries who made America. Ray was the principal inventor of the first CCD flatbed scanner, the first OmniFont optical character recognition, the first print-to-speech reading machine for the blind, the first text-to-speech synthesizer, the first music synthesizer capable of recreating the grand piano and other orchestral instruments, and the first commercially marketed large vocabulary speech recognition. Amazing, isn't it? Among Ray's many honours, he received a Grammy Award for Outstanding Achievements in Music Technology. He is the recipient of the National Medal of Technology, was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, holds 21 honorary doctorates and honours from 3 US presidents. Ray has written 5 national best-selling books, including New York Times bestsellers, The Singularity is Near, written in 2005, and How to Create a Mind in 2012. He is co-founder and chancellor of Singularity University and a director of engineering at Google, heading up a team developing machine intelligence and natural language understanding. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a huge, enormous creative innovation welcome to Ray Kurzweil.
Well, it's great to be with you, Tanya. I spend a lot of time talking to different people around the world, and if I want someone who can really give me an insight into the future, I go to Tanya in Australia because she has really compatible vision that I have for what the future will bring. And so I'd like to talk about the future. That's something I've actually done for almost 40 years. And I'd like to actually give you an idea why my predictions generally seem to be accurate. If you go to how my predictions are faring, if you put in how my predictions are faring on the web, it will bring up a 150-page document that goes through the predictions I've made at different times over the last 20 years. So for example, I made 147 predictions for 2009 in the late 1990s, and 86% of them were correct. And they were recorded in the age of spiritual machines. And I can explain why that is. So these are my predictions for the next 25 years. Any questions on any of this? Okay, I'll go through it a little more slowly. So most of my predictions, when I make them, seemed unlikely or impossible. Now they just seem to be correct. People ignore the exponential nature of technological change. So their long-term predictions leave out the essence of change. People point out the fact that exponential change does not go on forever. So if you have exponential, it eventually comes to an asymptote. However, so that's an S-curve. However, we've seen that one S-curve leads to another S-curve. And this has happened already 4 times with computation. And we're already on the 6th paradigm, which is 3-dimensional growth of transistors. If you leave out the exponential, 30 changes gets you to 30. And that's why people in the long term leave out the usability of change. 30 doublings in an exponential gets you to 1 billion. That's what we've seen with electronics, and we'll see it soon with every other product. So this is where it started. In the 1980s, I realized that timing was critical to being an inventor. Thomas Edison, Larry Page, other inventors you've heard about, were in the right place with the right idea at the right time. Timing was critical for everything from making investments to romance. So I noted the speed of these processors, that is calculations per second per constant dollar, for all the computer processors up to that year. You see, going back to the early 20th century, the data forms a straight line on an exponential chart. And a straight line on an exponential chart is exponential growth. Note that this chart is not Moore's law. People look at this, oh, Moore's law, but this has to do with technologies before Moore's law came into being. Moore's law has to do with chips, not with these first 4 paradigms of computation. My own concept of exponential growth was not just limited to chips, but is the basic idea of growth in technology, even before there was change directed by human life. Life itself took billions of years, whereas mammalian growth took only hundreds of millions, primates took only tens of millions of years, humanoids took only millions. As humans took over technology, this path went to technology. The printing press took centuries. Today we have new phases of technology in just a few years' time. So I put these computational technologies on a graph, which is this graph, and put it sort of on the left, and extended it, which has become the basis of my predictions. I expected future processors to be on this line, but this was done 45 years before these new computational technologies would happen. So what happened? 45 years later, this has been the result. If we go back, this is what I predicted, and this is what actually happened. And this has been the basis of my predictions. Of course, you have to use some technological sophistication to understand what speed will enable what capabilities, but this is the core idea. The speed of the processor per constant dollar is right on the line that I had projected decades earlier. Every other aspect of electronics is proceeding in the same way. And this is not just because the computational speed is greater. Here's the speed of telecommunications. We processed a few characters per minute using Morse code over AM radio a century ago. Today it has multiplied 1 trillion-fold for the same cost. Now this is on a computational graph. It's a straight line, so it's exponential growth. The total number of bits shipped each year is basically doubling every year. So we can ship a better product each year for less money. That's deflation on the order of 50% per year, and it underlies every aspect of our technology, not just bits of memory. Even before we had electronics, we had this deflationary process that improved every aspect of life. However, people's understanding is the opposite of the actual progress. People think that things are getting worse, when the opposite is the case. This is a poll of 24,000 people in 23 countries. They were asked whether extreme poverty has gotten better or worse over the past 20 years. 70% thought it had gotten worse. Only 12% thought it had gotten better. The reality is that poverty had actually decreased by 50%, which was the prediction of only 1% of the people who responded. So I have many dozens of slides showing progress on every aspect of human well-being over the last decades and the last centuries. Let me just share a few of them. Here, these circles are countries, and this is the state of the world in 1800. So life expectancy on the y-axis was in the 30s. So life expectancy was in the 30s of years, even in the wealthy countries. Income per person in today's dollars was in the hundreds of dollars per year, shown in today's dollars. So even in the wealthy countries, it was hundreds of dollars that you tried to live on in a year. So let's see what happened over the next century. There's a little bit of movement from the first technological revolution, but not much is happening until we get to the 20th century, in which all of these circles, all of these countries move to the upper right-hand corner of the graph. And while there's still a country gap between richest and poorest, the poorest countries are actually far better off than the richest countries were at the beginning of this process. So I'll just go through a few of these rates that define human quality. And by the way, people think things are getting worse, and every single aspect, they get better by century and better by decade, including just in recent years. Here's literacy rates by country going back to the 15th century. US education expenses per capita in constant dollars since 1949. Whenever you see reference to currency, it's today's dollars, not the dollars then. The number of years of education for different countries since 1870. Electricity in homes for the US and the world since 1900. US and world households with computers from 1984 to present. So this is life expectancy at birth and at year one. Now, year one shows life expectancy with the high rate of death near birth removed. It only adds about 7 years at first. So life expectancy in 1841 was only about 40 years from birth and 47 years at year one. Declining poverty rates worldwide since 1820. Decline in extreme poverty across different areas. This is US GDP per capita in constant dollars. We're definitely getting richer. This is the average of GDP per person in constant dollars for personal income from 1929. And this is interesting. This is the average income per hour actually earned by each person in the United States in constant dollars since 1929. It just goes up. This is in today's dollars. So we hear a lot of reporting that average income per hour has stabilized. It's not going up, but that's obviously not the case. Our work week has gone down. It shot up slightly after the Great Depression, but it's continued to go down since then. This is one consequence of increased automation. I'll come back to increased automation in a moment. Decline of child labor in the world since 2000. So obviously any child labor is not desirable, and the fact that it's greater than zero is not positive. I'm not saying everything is perfect, but everything is moving in the right direction. Homicide rates in Western Europe since 1300. You didn't want to live in 1300. We have an exponential growth of renewable energy. It's double. Now this is renewable energy that will replace fossil fuels. It's increasing. It's actually increasing at an exponential rate. It's doubling every 4 years. So it should reach 100% by the early 2030s. The growth rate for solar energy is even higher. Oh, and by the way, when we reach 100%, we'll only be using 1 part in 10,000 of all the sunlight that hits the Earth. So it's not like we're going up and we're hitting 90%. We're hitting 1 part in 10,000. So another important issue, spread of democracy. It was very small, maybe a century ago. Really began with the Gutenberg printing press, beginning to distribute information to people, continued through the 20th century with radio, TV, and computers. It's now up to 50%. Again, it's not perfect. We'd like it to be 100%, but it's definitely moving in the right direction. So this is really a comment on employment and what's going to happen to employment. So if I were back in 1800, I would point out that 80% of the workforce in 1800 worked with farm labor. So if you were working at all in 1800, you were doing something with farm labor. That's now 2% today. And you can see it's just gone down to about 2%. We've had a similar trend with manufacturing labor, going from 25% in 1920 to 9% today. Yet, overall labor has gone from 26 million in 1900 to over 140 million today. So despite the fact that these, basically the type of employment that everybody had went from 80% to 2%, we've actually increased the amount of labor from 26 million to 140 million, from 31% of the workforce to 44% of the population today. 65% of American workers deal with information in jobs that would not be recognizable in 1900. For example, web designer, app developer, IT engineer, and so on. If I were to say at the end of the 19th century that 20 million people would be studying poetry and quantum mechanics by the beginning of the 21st century, that would seem absurd to a country that had only 65,000 college students in 1870. It's the same thing in Australia. Yet that is what happened to with 20 million college students today, comparable amount in Australia, plus another 10 million who service them. we'll begin to create new jobs that we cannot imagine today, and also create new forms of being productive as college students studying poetry and quantum mechanics are considered today. Now, I mentioned we've seen great deflation in electronics and related products, and that's certainly true of your phone. If you imagine what a phone was like 8 years ago, it's much more expensive and it did very little. And we haven't, well, we have seen that in many areas of non-electronic products, but over the next decade, we're going to see deflationary trends, not just in electronics, but in commodities like food, with AI-controlled vertical agriculture, as seen here. We'll see deflation in building costs and routine products as 3D printing becomes prevalent, deflation in energy as renewable energy sources become the norm, and deflation in food production with vertical agriculture producing food products. Now, imagine what this will mean, because we have already a gross domestic product that's really part of our welfare. This is the gross domestic product for different countries. In the United States, this is percentage of GDP. Our GDP is actually greater. So we actually spend more than some of the socialist countries in Europe. It's the same thing with Australia, pretty much keeps track with the United States. As prices for food and other necessities of life come down, this will be enough for most people's life's needs by the 2030s. It's not quite there yet. I mean, if you have to live on this kind of welfare, it's you can manage, and it's much better than it was a century ago, but it actually will be very enough for most people's life's needs as we get to the 2030s, and certainly by the end of the 2030s. Here's the expenditures for the US total social safety net spending. So it started out almost at zero. It's gone up steadily. It just goes up, and the percentage of GDP also rises with it. I think you'd have a hard time finding a period that represents left-wing social spending versus right-wing conservatism here. I mean, try to find where you see that. It basically just goes up. The real inflationary, deflationary trend, which is hidden, is extreme deflation of all products caused by the deflation of electronics. So this amount of social safety net, even ignoring future increases, which will happen, will be enough for most people to live quite well in the 2030s. This would be a whole lecture. In fact, I do have a whole lecture on it. But the deflation in DNA sequencing costs has enabled biotechnology. And that's what really brought biotechnology to the fore. Decoding the first genome cost $1 billion. Now it costs about $1,000. And we are finding genetic changes that overcome the burdens of biology. For example, immunotherapy for cancer. And this is now being used at an increasing amount. Immunotherapy for cancers, where a patient's blood cells are treated outside of the body, they're re-injected into the patient, and then light up that person's own immune system to fight their specific type of cancer. This is personalized medicine. It's far less invasive than traditional treatments and provides far more promise for patient safety. There have been a number of tests where every single person, including stage 4 cancers, have obtained complete remissions. And there's a lot more to come from biotechnology over the next decade. So moving to the brain, our ability to image the brain, both destructive and non-destructive brain imaging, is constantly getting better. We can now see individual nerve cells forming in real time with non-destructive imaging. As a result, we're able to form a realistic idea of how our brains work. And I described this in my last book, How to Create a Mind. At first, it was thought that the interconnections, if I want to create a connection from this axon to this dendrite, was a huge mess. But we were not scanning it with enough resolution. It was too low. Now that we're scanning it with high resolution, what we see is that all axons are already connected with other axons. And when two axons want to remain connected, the interconnections are made permanent. Now, I talk a lot about the neocortex. The neocortex is something that came with mammalian animals 200 million years ago, started with mice, and the neocortex has gotten more sophisticated as we've gone through the past 200 million years. In fact, we had 65 million years ago, the Cretaceous extinction event, where suddenly we think it has to do with a meteor. The dinosaurs died then, and that's when the neocortex became prominent for mammalians. And then mammalians grew larger, their brains grew bigger, and they became really dominant in terms of intelligent life on Earth. The neocortex is the outermost layer of the brain. It's thin, essentially a two-dimensional structure. It's about as thick as a napkin with intricate folds, with deep ridges, grooves, wrinkles that increase its surface area to be the bulk of the human brain. It's responsible for our ability to deal with patterns of information in a hierarchical fashion. So there are levels of the neocortex. There are many dozens of them. And as you go up, all the levels are actually processing simultaneously. As you go up through the different levels, each level adds some concept as to what we're perceiving. So here you can see the different levels add an understanding of what words are doing on a page. If you were to go up another 20 levels, you'd have axons that decide whether this passage is ironic or funny or deceitful. So this is actually a young girl. She was 16. She was actually having brain surgery, and the surgeons wanted her to be conscious and react to her experience. So whenever they touched the axons here shown in red, she would laugh. They first thought she's having some laugh reflex, but they quickly discovered that no, she was actually perceiving humor only when they touched these points. They had touched the points that detected humor, and she found everything hilarious. "You guys are so funny just standing around," was a typical comment. They had found the points that actually detect humor. And this has been done in other experiments with other high-level axons, such as detecting irony, for example. Now, this is a simple neural net. It's organized as a single level. It emerged in the 1960s. In 1962, when I was 14, I visited Dr. Rosenblatt at Cornell. He was pushing something called the perceptron. It was really the first neural net that got attention. And it was a computer model that could recognize shapes. So it could recognize written letters, or figure out the vowels for a sound, or learn certain types of concepts. So I came to Cornell in 1962 with various letter shapes, and I would hold up the letter shapes to the visual perception box of the perceptron, and it worked on a few, but most did not work. He said to me, and this is actually quite significant, if we were to create a perceptron with multiple layers, not just one, it would overcome the vagaries that a perceptron could not deal with. So I also had a mentor at MIT. 1969, he wrote a book called Perceptrons with Seymour Papert, and it proved that a perceptron could not solve something called the connectedness problem. So basically, if you have a shape that's all connected, that's connected. If you have a shape that's, let's say, something here and something here, that's not connected. Fairly simple problem. And he proved that a perceptron could not solve whether or not a shape was connected or not. The book was so successful that all funding for connectedness was cut for the next 25 years. However, the theorem really only proved that a single level perceptron could not solve the problem. And he actually regretted this. Multi-level perceptrons could do that. And everybody was using multi-level perceptrons by the time you got to this century. Shortly before he died a few years ago, and this is 50 years after these interactions, Minsky acknowledged that the neural nets were indeed a very promising road ahead. And indeed, that is the primary road that we're following now. Rosenblatt's concept was indeed very prescient because he had never done a multi-level perceptron before. And yet he figured out that this would actually solve the problem. And that not only would it solve the problem, but it would ultimately solve problems that humans are unable to do. So it's now 60 years after the introduction of the perceptron. It's only recently, I mean like the last couple of years, that we have now achieved a computational density that can support neural nets for a human level ability. But it actually goes way past human levels. Now this graph, it looks like my other graph, it goes up over time, but it's not, the doubling time is not 1 year. The doubling time here is 3.5 months. This is where we take a neural net model and see how much computational ability is required to do that. And we've basically been doubling the amount of computation in a neural net every 3.5 months. So it's the speed has increased 300,000 fold since 2012. So consider AlphaZero. This came a little over a year ago from DeepMind's Google subsidiary. It taught itself Go with only the Go rules. It was not given any moves by humans. Its performance is way past the best human. You take the very best humans, it can't be close to AlphaZero. But that's not the most significant thing about AlphaZero. We've had other times, 1997, we had an IBM computer that defeated the best Go player, the best chess player. But that computer could only do that. And every other computer that's won a game has only been devoted to that one type of game. Here, the very same neural net, when given the rules of chess, went way past every human with only a few hours of training, and also every other chess machine. It's also done a number of other things. Now, you might think that it can only do board games, but actually it can actually do really just about anything. It was asked to master protein folding. Now, that's not a board game. In biology, we have all these cells. The cells put out a chain of amino acids, and they're in a straight line. And in a magic moment of biology, this linear sequence of amino acids folds up into a unique three-dimensional shape. So this is a key thing in biology, and to try to predict what that three-dimensional shape would be is very, very demanding. A few people have learned it. This very same neural net that learned Go and learned chess and learned other things taught itself protein folding and was way ahead of the best humans at predicting protein folding. The best humans got 3 shapes predicted out of 99. AlphaZero got 43 out of 99. So this actually will be extremely valuable in creating new proteins for medications. What is clear from these examples is that a neural net can master concepts if you have the latest neural nets. That's a result of 60 years of increase in computation that's far greater than the very best human. So if we have a comparison showing, let's say, how one shape let's say a radiology exam is portrayed as a diagnosis. And if we have millions of examples of that, which we do, it can master that far better than any human. In fact, everything that humans can do is explained by these types of examples. Some will require some navigation to find because they're not always written down. We might have to actually monitor the world to find what those things are. But over the next few years, we'll have these nets explore everything intelligent that humans can do. And even if we learn ideas from other humans and there's no text to guide us, these bots will be able to track that information as well. AI is also making progress in natural language. If you have Gmail, you'll notice that it provides an intelligent response, giving 3 choices for your next email. That choice is actually provided by my team at Google. We've also put the same capability in something called Talk to Books. So if you go to Google and just put in Talk to Books, you'll get the link. And then you go to that link and you can ask any question you want. And the software will read all of 120,000 books. It actually reads all of 120,000 books in a second. It's 500 million sentences. And in a second gives you the best answer from the 120,000 books based on the meaning of your question and the responses. And so you can try that out. There are tests where you can read a paragraph and then answer questions about your understanding of the paragraph. You've probably taken this if you've been in grade school. About 6 years ago, AI computers were challenging the 3rd grade test. Today, they are exceeding the average adult score on the adult test. I believe that in 2029, that's another 10 years, and we already have these types of models that can do this. AI will pass the Turing test. With the increase in computation and increasing mastery of every human skill, we'll have both the Turing test that can master human responses, which is what the Turing test is about, as well as an AI that can master every human skill in every definable area, going way past humans. So what happens then? People's imagination imply that it will be humans versus AIs. We see that in dystopian movies of the future. But that is not how we've used technology thus far. We've used it to amplify our own capabilities. For example, try building the building that you're in. It'd be very hard to do with your bare muscles, but we have machines that go way past our muscles. And so with those machines, we're able to build a great structure. Now, we will use the increasing strength of non-biological thinking to extend our own thinking. We'll actually do this today with devices, but these will eventually go inside our heads. So my scenario is that at the top level of our neocortex, we'll extend, we will connect with extenders that access the web. Now, I mentioned that there are multiple layers of the neocortex, but the layers are not like this. They're actually like a pyramid. And the very top level increases, detects the things that are most sophisticated, like irony and humor and so on. That's the level that we want to extend to add new concepts. So it's the top layer that needs to be extended. We would then have a combination of our natural intelligence with the supernormal intelligence that we are creating. So this is in the 2030s. We're already more intelligent than we were before we had our brain extenders. That's today. We already have all of human knowledge at our fingertips. As we get into the 2030s, we'll proceed at an ultra-fast pace of extending our capabilities. So I've thought about how can I present these ideas in a way that will resonate with everyone, young and old. So I thought about a compelling story of a young person who uses her intelligence and accelerating technologies to take on the most difficult problems confronting the human race. So Danielle is the name of my character. She's a remarkable character who does what every talented, ambitious person wants to do. She takes action and changes the world for the better. In my view, this novel, which I'm actually releasing in 2 weeks, is a thought experiment as to what would happen if there were a Danielle in the world. So this is the novel, and it has the novel in it, but it also has a couple of other things. It's more than a work of fiction. It's a vision, a parallel history, a roadmap for readers of all ages. It includes the ideas that I've articulated at the beginning of my lecture, but also a lot more. In the literary first, the novel actually comes with 2 companion nonfiction books also written by me. And those nonfiction books are actually on the web. If you go to danielleworld.com, you'll find the entire 2 nonfiction books available there. But they're also in this book. One is called How You Can Be a Danielle. And in this book, they're pretty heavy. It's a Chronicle of Ideas, which is 280 essays on the ideas in the book. So a Chronicle of Ideas, it's a nonfiction guide to the scientific, technological, medical, entrepreneurial, political, historical, literary, musical, philosophical, and psychological ideas that animate the world of Danielle. The entries offer provocative insights into my inspiration and thinking on diverse ideas, from string theory to Jimi Hendrix to Alice in Wonderland. And the nonfiction books also includes How You Can Be a Danielle, which provides pragmatic, thought-provoking, and clear ideas to action on how readers can be like Danielle and help bring about a better world. And the novel includes 24 color illustrations by a New Yorker cartoonist and my daughter, Amy Kurzweil. It's one for each year of her life. And here Danielle shows her sister her book at age 1. She's not yet speaking, but she will speak. And my idea is actually for everyone to become Danielles, to read the book, to read How You Can Be a Danielle, and in one way or another, help bring about a better world for everybody else. Thank you very much.
Ray Kurzweil, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Ray. Thank you very much. Michael Pope, I'm been emceeing this conference, and I'll ask Tanya to join me as well. Thank you so much for presenting that. First thing, just for clarification, are you coming from your studio in Boston or Alpha Centauri? I'm just not sure exactly where you are.
We're outside Boston, yeah.
Right, cool. Tanya, would you like to start with some questions?
Thank you so much, Ray. It's lovely to see you and have you here. And I wanted to, the first question actually, so I've actually read Danielle, and for any of you that have daughters and sons, indeed, it's not just a book for girls, is it, Ray?
It's not just for girls, and it's not just for boys, it's also for grown-ups. I'd say it's from maybe 10 to 110. And I've actually had people at those different ages reading it.
Can I ask you, you said to 110, are we going to live to 110 as a standard or even longer? Are we going to live forever, right?
Well, we're addressing the things that cut short our lives. There's about 7 things I could point out that limit our lives to like 120, not that we actually get that far. But all of those are actually addressable. We're actually addressing things like cancer and heart disease before we get to that. And we're going to ultimately pass our ideas on to non-biological intelligence, which will work with us, and so we'll actually be able to back ourselves up. As you go further and further in time, we'll be able to live really longer and longer. So I wouldn't say it's forever, but it might seem that way. But then people say, well, aren't we going to get bored if we live that long? We're doing the same things over and over again. And I actually think that's true. We would get bored if we lived a very long time, if we had radical life expansion without radical life extension. So we're going to be doing things like virtual reality, as the previous speaker just spoke about, and a lot of other things that will enhance our minds. Right now, we have about 10 to the 14th calculations per second in our brain. We're actually going to expand that. So we're going to live a much more enhanced life as well as extended life.
So just going back to the Danielle book for a moment. So I highly recommend this book. Like Ray sent it to me and I just read it over summer and it was captivating, page turning and just so inspirational. My gosh, if our young people could be Danielle's, who knows what might be possible, or any of us for that matter. So Ray, my question is, do you think...
Thank you for that.
Do you think our public education system creates Danielle's? And if not, what kind of education system is needed to encourage girls and boys to apply their creative intelligence to solve problems? And what skills do all of us have to learn if we're going to manage this accelerating exponential future?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we need to learn by doing, and that's actually something that Danielle follows. In fact, the school she's in, she gets a little assignment, like when she's 11, to go solve the Israeli-Palestinian problem, which she does.
How does
she only
it end?
She only gets an A- in the course. So we may not want to assign that necessarily, but we do want to assign real meaningful work where people can actually change the world. And that's not been the philosophy. Now that's changing. My grandson is actually in a school that practices learn by doing, and they do different projects where they will learn how to read and do different things in the real world. And I think most of the problems that can be solved by ordinary people, including children. You know, the major companies we've seen have been founded by college students. We're now seeing high school students do fantastic things, including new medical tests that could be done by junior high school students. There's a form of this for elementary school where you actually go in the world, interact with it. You learn other skills, not as the major thing, but as a side product of actually learning how to change the world. And then the teachers actually becomes kind of a guide and mentor to doing that.
Ray, a speaker earlier today spoke about the importance of data, capturing it and then using it. And thank you for filling your presentation with so much data. And it's fantastic to hear the positivity that you're seeing from that. Can I take you to the farm labour slide, where in 1800, 80% were in farm labour, and today it's only 2%. We've been talking about the decrease in jobs, the disappearance of jobs. Yes, the emergence of others, but generally the feeling is that fewer individuals will be working as we know it today. How can we best prepare ourselves for that transition?
Well, there's two reasons. One is we keep creating new jobs, and it's very hard, and it's actually a political disadvantage because we can't really speak about these jobs because they haven't even been invented yet, and they're in a field that doesn't exist yet. And that's, of course, what we've seen over the last 2 centuries, and that's going to continue to happen. At the same time, the amount of money we're spending on social safety net Today, I mean, you can kind of get by, but it's not really very pleasant way to live. By the 2030s, the deflation for products that are not electronic, like food and housing and so on, is going to come down because of these same factors that are influencing everything else. Even without any further increases, we'll be able to live quite well on the same money we spend now. So it's not really increasing the amount of social safety net to do this. So it's going to become less important in terms of being able to maintain a comfortable way of life to do this. Ultimately, it'll actually be very easy if you go out to, say, 2040.
Right. Sorry, I'm mesmerized, and I thought you would continue. Forgive me for that pause.
No.
Tanya?
Well, no, just following on from that, Ray. So, and you and I have discussed this before, so that there's going to be less pressure, I guess, to earn as much money because prices are going to come down. So what do you feel is going to give us meaning and purpose in this new future? But given that work is such gives people such a great sense of meaning and purpose, mostly these days.
Well, yes and no. I mean, we get a tremendous amount of, I mean, if you publish a book, you want people to read it, you want people to appreciate the ideas. That's not just a financial perspective. That's something that comes from the heart and that you want to connect with people. People have different ways in which they appreciate knowledge. Music, for example, is something that is meaningful because you play it. So it's not just earning a living. In fact, most people generally get pleasure beyond just earning a living. And so to take that out of it, I think actually gives us more freedom and flexibility.
I applauded before the idea of data collection, but it's a bit scary what's going on in China with the tapping into the social networks and tracking and the AI and face recognition and so on, giving people almost a rating that then has consequence in their life. Is that sense of the all-pervasive AI future, where do you see the negatives for that? And is there an area where the negatives outweigh the positives?
Yeah, I mean, I've been accused of being an optimist, and I am somewhat optimistic, but I've written about the downsides of these technologies, and you could use these technologies to enforce a totalitarian system or an authoritarian system. And we do see that. I mean, I showed democracy is up to 50%. It's not up to 99%. And we do have to fight that. And I think that things like socialization and other types of activities, politics that affect our daily lives is still very important. It's not just up to the technology. And we could use technology to enforce an authoritarian system, and we do see that in the world. And so we have to keep working on that.
Do you see there's a growing sense of there's increasing mental health issues. Suicide rates are higher in the world. Do you see any correlation between a sense of isolation that humans are feeling now, those who are perhaps removed from the positives of the growth in technology? Can you see a parallel there and how we can work against those forces?
I'm not sure that suicide is actually increasing, but it is a serious problem. I think as we go forward, we'll actually have better ideas of how mental illness occurs. Right now, we have very vague psychiatric models of how it occurs. Something goes wrong and we're not really sure why, and there's something to do with serotonin, but we don't really have a precise method of actually understanding what happens with mental illness. We are getting the tools now to see inside the brain, and with continued research using these new tools, we'll have a much better idea of what actually goes wrong in mental illness, and we'll be able to fix it in many cases. So that's my view of how we'll address this as we go forward, say another 10, 15 years.
So Ray, we've witnessed how the internet has brought us tantalizingly close to the realization of a true World Wide Web. But are we about to see it being the driver of division rather than unity?
Well, it's so powerful and affects so many aspects of our lives that it's bound to get people criticizing it. We certainly see a lot of things that are wrong, but there certainly were things wrong before we had any internet. People had many problems without an internet, and but if you look at people who are using the internet, they use it all the time. They're getting a lot of benefit from it. We have access to all human knowledge. We can create communities based on common perception of value across the world. So it is complicated, but I think we gain a lot more benefit than problems that we're generating.
Is that a thought, or shall I continue with the last couple of questions?
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Cool. Can you take us away from the focus that we've had for these 3 days, and that is the human condition? The footprint that we have left on this planet is huge and in many cases terrible. What's your prediction for the decades ahead about the animals and plants and the planet on which we live? How's that health card looking?
Well, I think we'll be less dependent on animals. We already have various types of meat that don't require meat, but that taste like meat. And we're moving, I think, away from reliance on animals for food. And so I think we'll be able to appreciate the kind of positive quality that we can do with animals. And we're going to be going away from fossil fuels. That's not so far away. I mean, I believe that's 10 years away. We'll be able to use forms of energy that don't require fossil fuels. That'll make the world better for everybody. So I think we'll be able to have a more natural relationship with animals where we're not really dependent on them for food.
We're all becoming vegetarians, folks, as has been predicted a few times in this conference. Ray, so big overview. How do you see humanity evolving over this next decade?
Well, that was really what I talked about. It may seem startling to connect something into our brain to talk to the web, but it's really just a continuation of what we've been doing. We have devices, I mean, they might as well be part of our body because we never leave home without them. And they are part of our body. We stand to the web and connect to all of the world's knowledge. And we're being able to interact with that in a more and more fluid fashion. So we'll do it directly from our brains. It's really not so such a difficult thing to do. And that will then enable us to continue to expand. I mean, the web is growing, doubling every year. That's multiplying by 1,000 in 10 years. So imagine what we're doing today, and multiply by 1,000 for 2030 and another 1,000 for 2040, and imagine what that will mean for our experiences and our ability to do everything that we can do with each other. That's what the future is relying. It's not going to just settle in at some point. It's going to keep expanding indefinitely.
Final question, Ray. We spoke earlier this morning about the traditional education systems that the First World has, in particularly focus on universities and adult learning. How do you see that transitioning into the future?
I think universities is going to continue, because really what a university does is embodies somebody who's really an expert on certain modality and gets into that and pursues it. And we're going to continue to do that with increasing power of tools to expand our minds. We'll also have the ability ourselves to learn new things, but we'll have certain people that really guide us to pursue each pursuit, and that's there's going to be many more types of pursuits that we can pursue. I mean, if you look at the types of things that people pursue now, they didn't exist at all in 1900 or even 1950, and we're going to keep pursuing increasing forms of new types of development.
Cool. Last question, Tanya.
Yes, so why, Ray, I mean, this book, Danielle, is so inspirational, but why do you think educating young women in particular to be entrepreneurs is important?
Well, it really is for young women and young men. In fact, we have movies that show both young women readers and young men readers. And I don't know why it's a young woman. I mean, 9 years ago, I was trying to find some idea of a young person that would be able to bring these, do these developments. And she just turned out to be a young woman named Danielle. But it really is for young women, young men, and adults as well.
Well, thank you very much, Ray. Is there something else that you would like to say to everybody before we officially thank you? Because it's been such an honour to have you here and to have you create this special talk just for creative innovation.
Well, I've been talking about this for 40 years, and it's really only now, in the last couple of years, that we actually have the hardware and software to actually take on adult activities and go way past them. And not just have one big project that takes on chess and has lots of things that deal with chess. It's really one thing, and it can be applied to everything. And we've already shown it to be applied to a great many different types of things. And it requires a very advanced form of computation, but that's what we have now. So you're going to see fantastic pursuit of AI over the next few years.
Well, thank you very much from all of us here. From our hearts, we thank you for being here with us. It feels nearly like you're here, though I'd much rather give you a real hug than a virtual hug, but consider yourself hugged.
Yeah.
And
Well, thank you, Tanya and Michael. It's been great to be with you.
and will you give Ray a huge round of applause?
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ray.